Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. An important discussion, I think you'll all agree. Today we're talking about all things ESG in a residential context mainly. Sabine, I'll come to you first. Give us a brief explanation of what ESG means in a development and property context, please.
ESG stands for Environmental Social Governance, and broadly I think it looks at the different factors which an investor may consider when making their decisions beyond just sort of financial returns. I think historically it's focused on investment, but more and more we're probably seeing more of an emphasis for residents, for occupiers, for people, other stakeholders aside from investors. And very, very broadly, it's looking at sustainability and delivering sort of a positive impact beyond just financial returns.
Consumption of energy, utilisation of energy. I think that's probably one of the most primary factors that we need to consider when you're looking at developing a new product, particularly if it's a new build. How can we procure, distribute, store, resell, utilise that energy on site?
I think people with ESG get a bit frightened. They think, oh, how much is this going to cost me? And we're saying, well, actually, if you stop wasting energy, it's going to cost you less. Mm-hmm. And if you start thinking about the most efficient way to fit your building out or to refit your building out, then it can actually be very cost effective and you're future-proofing your building.
From our point of view as a developer, we own and manage a lot of our portfolio, so we actually get the buildings back. So when you're actually in it for the long game and you're sort of doing the sort of design at the beginning and then having to actually live with the building, it's worth the investment. For some people that come in and do development and then actually walk away, you don't actually see some of the pain. You can no longer design a building just to be compliant. It has to be a smart building. It has to be, technology has to be there. It has to go all the way through so that residents enjoy it, but the team running it are actually getting an easier job, and things are being done sort of in an automated way. There's no point knocking on doors to go and read meters anymore.
The good thing about ESG and the growth of the build to rent world particularly, which is something that Co-Waterhouse is focusing on, is that you've got that vested involvement from conception, design, development through the planning process all the way until you're reporting on the asset and how it's performing. And I think institutional money is really, they have lots of people that they need to answer to. So I think the growth of BTR in the regions is only going to prove positively for the importance of ESG, both at underwriting stage as well as its true operational process through its life.
You have a great disparity between the developers who want to build and leave and the developers who want to build and retain. A longer term plan and future-proofing, proper thought processes about end of development, handover and then post-completion phases. That's what we would like to see.
I was speaking to some young people last week at Trafford College about climate change and about COP, and the passion in that room was really, really moving, and it really made me sort of realise how much young people do care. And these are the future generations, and I think even if the value isn't necessarily directly transferable onto the purchase price at the moment, I think it's on its way up there, and more and more it's going to be a factor which people consider and which people value.
The developers who do want to build and leave, do any of them ever go back 5 years later? Do their architects go back 5 years later and see if they've still got the lights on the sensors that are supposed to be saving 40%? Have they still got the living wall that's supposed to be nice and green, or has someone let it die? Right. So there's very simple changes that can be made post-completion which can completely ruin all of these brilliant plans for a building.
We're building buildings now that will be coming out, that finished in like 2-3 years. So I think it's important to realise now the decisions you need to make so that actually works at that point.
If you want to now develop a building and sell it to one of these big funds, they're not going to buy it unless your building's green. Mm-hmm. So the driver will come the other way from the big investment companies. And let's face it, in property there'll always be people who just want to make a big, quick buck and go.
Exactly.
But that's not the main market, is it? The main market is the people who want to run the buildings efficiently and embrace ESG.
Yeah. Will towers still have a place in so many years? It's a really good question. I think when you start thinking about the embodied carbon and the environmental aspect, it's really easy to sort of argue them away. But when you think about the main, the key reason we have towers is because they're city centre, they're well connected to public transport, they provide amenities on your doorstep. They're very different to building on the green belt, building 200 new homes where everybody owns 2 cars. So I think, it's really easy to argue it away, but then when you think about some of the benefits in terms of the community, the social aspect, and even that sort of emissions and public transport, there are still really strong arguments for having this city centre, high density living.
As an institution reporting to other bodies and people whose money that you're managing, you need to report on, as a building, how is that operating and what are my reduction in carbon emissions, like how much energy we consuming, how much is wasted, how much technology is wasteful, and I think that's the thing that there needs to be more education on what systems are out there.
What we're trying to do is spin the market on its head and put a cable in the building. We've got some snazzy technology we can do that really efficiently. It's very unobtrusive to the resident. We want to put these technologies in and also give access to people like IBG to be able to benefit the owners of the building or the management company of the building, so they can get access to smart meters on the end of our cables. So we're opening up our network, if you like, to be able to give access to this information.
ESG doesn't need to be expensive. Building a building that is insulated well and reducing heat demand at the point of consumption is not something that needs to be expensive. However, it does tend to be something that's first on the chopping block when you're experiencing high inflation.
From our perspective, where we're not necessarily delivering new build but repurposing older buildings, it's absolutely possible to create these viable, attractive schemes, and we're finding they are attractive to young people and to young professionals. I mean, there's a huge amount happening in Stockport at the moment, and we've got towers that are going to be going up in Stockport. All developers are hot on there, so I think it's a matter of time, and it will branch out into the wider GM area and even beyond there across the north.
I like the vertical village type model where you've got everything in one place, but I don't like the Americanized version where you try and put everything in the building, because you don't have 200 yards to cross the street, a mile to get up the road to dry cleaners. You've got in Manchester a dry cleaner on that street and a dry cleaner on that street. You don't need it in your building as well. So there's an important balance to make there. But the key phrase for us from our side is placemaking. Once you go post completion and your building is live, everything can fluidly change, and if you're set up future-proofed and set up for those sorts of things, good connections, good technology, good design, and good spaces, then you can let things grow the way they want to grow rather than forcing something, and that's probably a really good way of keeping things sustainable, not just environmentally but economically.
The closer we got to COP26, the more people started taking it seriously, and I think the serious people in the serious businesses in the built environment have absolutely grabbed hold of it, and they're not going to let it go. And like every business, there'll always be some dubious characters or some people who want to make a quick buck, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. Using their own money, that's good. But I think the access to capital for big major developments is going to be a problem if you haven't got an ESG strategy.
When you're talking to clients, ask them, what are you doing around ESG? Where are you at the moment? Do you need any help? How can we help? Because we can fit into that quite nicely. And it's interesting that the 3 companies we're talking to, it's been hot on their agenda for the last 12 months. And these are big, large pension funds and institutional investors. It's the point where it's being talked about in the boardroom, on a monthly basis. When you look at institutional investors and you look at brands like, the guys who've got around the table today, you don't want to be retrofitting your buildings in 2, 3, 4 years' time. If you look at some of the build-to-rent operators, they'll have a car park in the basement and they'll probably have, say, 100 spaces. At some point when all the electric vehicle charging, vehicles are parking in there, they're all going to want a point installed. So are we thinking about, how are we going to do that?
Our leaders are now being vocal about it. They've got ambitions. They're definitely going to be putting this into, looking at how we accept kind of, what we're putting on the table in terms of new developments. So that's really key. And I think the city actually do a really good job of, guiding and sort of saying this is what we want to see. It's an education piece. And I think as long as everybody's on board, open and ready to learn from each other, that's the key thing. And I think we've already got the sort of city and the operators that will do that. So I think it's, I'm really optimistic.